something annoying, and he was like, "Yo, if you're gonna say something that dumb, just don't say anything." And then those words got immortalized into his identity forever.
Okay, possibly. But there is a claim that he did write something that he wrote, uh, and that was the beginning, etc. Right? So there is at least that kind of Sextus Empiricus says that there is a uh, humans are inexperienced, they are asleep, etc. So, yeah, or maybe just like he said something and it became a cornerstone of Western thinking. So, in light of what we discussed in terms of morality being subjective, objective, etc., what do you mean that he says, right? For this reason, it is necessary to follow what is common. This is number 2 on page 41. Although the logos is common, most people live as if they had their own private understanding. So what would that mean in terms of um, morality being subjective? And yes, blessed.
The way I think about it is that like he's saying that like well, in terms of morality, morality as a concept is and should be objective, but then people's understanding of it has been subjective. But like in its purest form, it should be subjective, which kind of makes me think about like the Kantian thing, but then like just like that it should be subjective and possibly universal, but then everyone else has like their own understandings of it, making it subjective, which is like the wrong interpretation, I guess.
I guess you are using the words objective and subjective correlate to common and private.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, let's try common and uh, private for a while, assuming that we are also covering the distinction between subjective and objective, because those are very complicated distinctions between subjective and objective, because in the history of philosophy, at some point, subjective meant objective and objective meant subjective. Like it was exactly the opposite. So therefore, common and private might be better. Yes, Olivia. Sorry. So that you are always there. So I don't, because usually whoever raises their hand goes up to the corner, but since you are always there, I don't see it always. Go ahead.
So, like, in order to understand this passage, I wanted to clarify something, which is that, like, the logos that Heraclitus talks about, he sees that as like a sort of objective universal truth
Come.
about a common universal truth about um how the universe works on like a physical level, but that's not really separate from questions of like how humans should live, right?
Exactly. And I think that's a really crucial observation. Yes. That idea that we should live according to how things are.
So in that case, this passage feels really problematic to me because he is saying like his implication is that people don't, or not his implication, his direct statement is that people, well, they think they do, don't actually have like a private understanding of logos because there's only one like objectively right logos. And I don't know, that almost strikes me as sort of very similar to the way that like the overzealous contemporary like scientist thinks of like, oh, we don't need philosophy anymore, we're gonna like open up the brain and see how humans really work and know exactly the right way to live and stuff. Like the idea of there being like a sort of universally determined way for humans to live when there's so much subjectivity in human life seems, I don't know, it makes me uncomfortable.
That's a very good tension that you identified there. Yes, uh, that is correct. Now, the desire for that or the drive for that comes from the recognition that most of human beings scientifically behave in similar and common ways. And it's always a question of uh, balance, because sure, I don't want to be treated just like a number. I want to be treated with the uniqueness and the proper respect of my individuality, except when I have a heart disease, in which case I want to be as common as possible because I don't want any peculiar things in my heart, any differences, etc. I want my heart to be treated just like millions of hearts that these or other doctors treated, so that I don't have this unique malady that no one can figure out. And I don't want to go to a doctor and say, your liver is such that scientifically we have no understanding of your liver. We have all the other livers, but yours is particularly horrible. So that I don't want. Like there's a question of balance in terms of scientific discourse. And also that's, you all went to high school. You sort of negotiate this, like, I want to be different. I don't want to be like everybody else because they are common and boring, etc. But on the other hand, I don't want to be completely excluded either. So there is this tension of belonging and not belonging, being common and not being common, being subjective or like being private as opposed to something common. And there is a sense in which when we agree with other people, that makes us happy too. I mean, we all say everybody has their subjective morality with a tinge of complaint, because when people agree with this is where you sort of form alliances and groups, etc. It tickles your inner sense and say like, oh, people agree with me. That's wonderful. I don't want to be like completely different than everybody else. That would be a very difficult way of being. So yes, there is a tension, but he seems to think that private understanding, usually since in everyday life, we are asleep. We are concerned about things that we shouldn't be concerned about. We care about meaningless little stuff and lose the common element that is important for all of us. Do we not? I don't know. I mean, in terms of, again, a kind of way of being, things that you consider to be important and relevant and life-changing, etc., are actually not that significant compared to the general configuration of logos. But you're right to be concerned about that fragment. So he says, don't listen to me. Listening not to me, but to logos, it is right to agree that all things are one. This is on page 42. So this kind of notion that everything else is connected to everything else. Yes, Isaac. I can't hear you. Did I do something?
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. I was just saying, I thought it was interesting that he specifically brings in like sensory input as the origin of his logos. Like on page 47, he has two quotes. He says, all that can be seen, heard, experienced, these are what I prefer. And so, yeah, that's what I think he views as the common, logos of the universe. The physical world governs how we should live.
Okay, anybody? Yeah, that's a leap. I think that's an interesting leap. I don't know whether it is, obviously, because everybody sees the things that are in front of us. So is that what he means? All that can be seen, heard, experienced, these are what I prefer. Eyes are more accurate witnesses than the ears.
Yeah, I just think it was kind of connected to what he's talking about with sleeping. Like when he says people are asleep, it's almost that they're completely ignorant of the world around them, and they're not responding to their sensory inputs and the actual logic of the world.
Okay. Yes, Nancy.
I had a question that feels kind of linked to this. His number 44 is the soul has a self-increasing logos. And I didn't really get the self-increasing thing. Is that to do with time and experience and like sense? And is it that the logos becomes more revealed to our souls? Or is it that we build it? I guess it's subjective, and so it becomes more revealed.
I would think the other, yes, I would think that it reveals more as you, the commonality of your soul increases. I guess that also speaks to kind of passage of time that, you know, at first in the world, you try to establish your individuality, your difference, your uniqueness. And then as the time goes by, you try to become more part of the whole. I think that would be a good metaphor for human organism in general. Like we try to create our own individual place and existence difference, but then merge into the universe. Yeah, Charlie.
So does that mean like humans after a certain point begin to just kind of regress to the mean of the general population? That's kind of like part of like, because it fits in, but also because this is a question that terrifies me. Like, am I going to become an old complacent person at
Yeah.
some point? Is
Yeah.
that just a part of life?
Yes.
Ugh.
If you want the short answer, absolutely. No, I think that what it means is that this complicated relation between belonging and not belonging, and the construction of identity in terms of belonging and not belonging. So, I mean, again, I give this silly example of high school, which I think is like a great harsh metaphor for life, namely like you are excluded and the pain of exclusion, while at the same time trying to ascertain your individuality, while at the same time being afraid of that individuality because it makes you weird and different and you want to belong. So that's the kind of, and yes, as you get probably older, a la Anaximander, when you justice and according to justice paying penalty, maybe yes, you are becoming more complacent in that particular sense because you formulated it as complacent. One could formulate it as coming home, becoming more at home in the world or something like that. So
I guess like the nice part of it, following that logic, and as a bit of a romantic notion, is that then maybe when we die, it implies our souls become fully ordered and fully part of everything else.
that they certainly believe that. And I think that's really the kind of deriving thought behind this idea of the immortality of the soul. So you might lose your individuality, but you are becoming part of the universe. I mean, even like scientists today, what's that popular science guy? Tyson Grass?
Bill Nye.
Tyson, what's his name?
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
What? Neil
deGrasse Tyson.
Neil deGrasse Tyson. He says like, isn't it wonderful that we are part of stardust? And he's very excited about this. And it's like, that's actually, I mean, despite the fact that he doesn't like philosophy, I have problems with him, but that's okay. He's very excited about this idea. Yes, like we are part of a whole, and in that sense, he is just made of the same stuff that as we are.
Mm.
Even though he's very smart and very better than all of us.
So is the scientific method and science kind of contrary to becoming more at ease and at, I don't know, like kind of pushing aside just the idea of wanting to like settle down, accepting yourself as part of the earth and being intertwined versus pushing that away and being like, nah, I'm going to focus all my energy on the unknown and hopefully seek to find, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of just thinking out loud.
I think the opposition,
I should probably hash this out more in my mind.
I don't think the distinction is not between like accepting and as if you know or something like that, as opposed to the pursuing the unknown. It's just that you, I mean, the thing that we read was this idea of commonality is not something that we figured out. Like it's already like established and accepted and complacent, as you put it. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It's just like the passage of time in a very Anaximander sort of way. You know? So he uses the term lover of wisdom on page 45, section 36, the fragment 36, B35. So men who are lovers of wisdom must be inquirers into many things, indeed. So I'm not sure whether he uses andros or anthropos, but lovers of wisdom is the first time the philosopher, the philia of Sophos, philias, I guess.
Can I just ask something else about what we were talking about before? Does that kind of go against the scientific, I don't really know science, but about entropy and how everything's becoming more and more complex and less ordered? Like, are they in opposition to each other? What
Oh,
he's
I don't know. I don't know. Does entropy mean that like things are becoming more and more complicated and less ordered? So chaos. So I mean that actually sort of we came out of chaos and go back to chaos. Is that how you were thinking?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Someone probably has a better understanding of me than about what entropy is, but
yeah.
As far as I understand, it's basically the idea that like we start with like this very hot chaos in the Big Bang, and then we end with a very cool chaos, which is when everything gets disorganized and energetically distributed, and everything's just really cold, and everything's over.
Yeah, I don't understand the metaphor of temperature there. Like, what is that hot as opposed to cold mean?
It just means that like there's only a certain amount of energy in the universe total, as we understand, and then like the idea being that since the universe is expanding, that energy is getting distributed over wider and wider areas until in any given area there's functionally no energy there, and therefore no heat. I don't know if that's actually accepted as like the gospel scientific truth of what's going to happen, or just a theory, or I don't know.
Nothing should be, but yeah, nothing should be accepted as gospel. Yeah. But yeah, so energy is hot then. I see, and then once it distributes, then it's getting colder. Okay.
Well, energy is not necessarily hot, but you need energy to produce. There's a specific type of energy called heat energy, which is what we read as.
I mean, they use the metaphor of heat and cold, which is, I mean, it's a metaphor because its temperature is also, I guess, depending on how you measure it. To call somebody hot is like, to call something hot is really a very subjective thing. I mean, like temperature hot, like, you know, because compared to the sun, that's pretty cold. So, yes.
Possibly equating what we were talking about to entropy, maybe like as you're younger, as you're kind of going along like the high school analogy, you exist in an unstable state. You're kind of more like you have a narrower scope of like, I don't know if it's you haven't experienced much. Oh, you don't know much of the logos, and what you do know is like subject to change because of your little experience with the universe. And as you grow older, you yourself are finding more peace and your energy is dispersed more over kind of this, I don't know, your perception of the world, because more, I mean, you know the logos more. So it's not that you're losing,
Yeah.
you're not losing entropy, you're still kind of gaining entropy, but as like the universe was at the beginning, it was very stable, it was very hot, it was all in one space. Now it's kind of spread out and more established, and even though it appears cool.
No, that's a good observation. Actually, most of our discussion operates with an assumption that sometimes even like in the previous Anaximander, we saw that we operate with a clear distinction between what is real and what is literal and what is metaphoric. So we look at all this language that they are using, that it's too poetic. That means they are indirectly talking about it. They are not talking directly about it. And they're also conflating and confusing different planes. Like, you know, with Anaximander, we had this issue, like, are we talking about the cosmos, universe, or justice? Like, these are separate domains. And metaphor as a language is very clear what it is. And literal speaking is not like that. The literal is more like the scientific discourse that we should sort of exclude all the kind of poetic and flowery language and blah, blah. But I don't think that distinction does exist in the way that we understand it today. So even like, you know, especially in the 20th century, certain philosophers, including Derrida, make this point that we operate with a clear distinction between metaphor and literal meaning, but it's really not clear at all. In fact, even when we are talking about science, even using the metaphor of hot chaos as opposed to cold chaos already is a metaphoric understanding, not a pure literal understanding. So these people don't have these kinds of clear-cut, pure distinctions that we have in our understanding of the world. And now, whether that should or should not be, that's another question. One question we should ask, step back and say, how is it that we think in the 21st century in light of all these binary oppositions? And how is it that we can even understand these people who do not operate with these? So that is a question to ponder. Yes, Olivia.
So, not to bring up psychology in this class, but to the point of like the unclear line between literal meaning and metaphor, I think it's also really interesting to note that like there have been psychological studies that demonstrate that the human mind basically interprets metaphors and literal things the same way, in as much as like, so if you give people a clipboard with a description of like a story on it, and you're like, what is the weight of this story, like the moral, emotional weight of the story? If you hand them a heavier clipboard, they will rate the story as more weighty, which I think is really, really interesting and kind of speaks to that divide.
That's it. Wow, that's interesting. So heavy. And even the metaphor, the term metaphor in Greek is itself a metaphor. It really means to carry over. So like metaphor literally means to carry over. So even the word metaphor is made of a metaphor. So it really is impossible for us to say, as long as we use language, where this stops and where it begins. So Jacques Derrida, a contemporary, well, he's dead, but like 20th century French philosopher, has a really beautiful essay on metaphor. So I would recommend that. Yes, Kate.
Yeah, I was kind of hesitant to bring this up, but last year I wrote a paper on how we often use like metaphors to teach STEM subjects, but what if we used thermodynamics, so talking about heat and entropy, to teach like the concept of Plato's like madness and the Phaedrus, and like the idea that like heat is utilized by the Greeks often to like portray like the descent into madness. Like the two are inherently coupled, and you can kind of understand like the nature of the soul and like the descent into philosophical madness by using the laws of physics and putting it in that context. And I guess like again, it kind of broaches into that larger conversation on like what is a metaphor and what is literal, and can you really just switch the two and are they the same thing? Like they're both human constructs that are defined by barriers of language. So does one necessarily have more merit than the other if they're both constructs of the human mind?
Good point. Good point. I mean, I thought about reading Phaedrus for this class. We'll probably end up reading Phaedo, but it's that would be an interesting question. The reason that is important for another way is what Isaac said with respect to all that can be heard, experienced, that these are what I prefer. Now, there is really a metaphor here too, because what we see for him, I think, is not just what is immediately present in front of us, because that becomes almost a philosophical dictum with and through Heraclitus, because he says, nature loves to hide. This is on page 42. The physis loves to hide. And then a related claim that is extremely important, that attributed to Heraclitus, is the Lord whose oracle is at Delphi. Who is the Lord whose the oracle is at Delphi? Who is that Lord?
Zeus?
Close, but not. One of the other ones, one of the, not the god of gods, but oracle who tells Socrates that he is the wisest person, who also happens to be the one who tells Oedipus that he is going to kill his father and marry his mother, is Apollo. Apollo, the god of appearances, the god of beauty, etc. So the Lord whose oracle is at Delphi neither speaks nor conceals. Conceals literally means the opposite of truth. The truth in Greek means aletheia. Lethe is concealment. Lethe is also forgetting, but gives a sign. Now, this giving a sign is really important because for Heraclitus, or for the subsequent philosophical tradition, we cannot understand the causes, the principles, and this is especially striking in Aristotle, in terms of just merely looking at the things in front of us. Because those are signs, those are appearances, they are not reality. They are constructed in terms of other things, causes. So that also the beginning of philosophical madness, because you look away from what is in front of you. If you want to understand things, you cannot just simply empirically look at them. Now you realize that both in scientific activity, but also in philosophical activity too, like most of the time when people simply talk about things that are present in front of them, they don't understand them. You need to understand them in terms of things that are not visible, things that are not given. So in philosophy, there is always this definition of madness of being away, looking away, not looking directly into appearances, because that doesn't give you reality. And this idea that the world as it appears to us is not how it is a very important insight that science today only verifies. Science verifies the fact that the world is not the way it looks to us. And that is the beginning of all kinds of both scientific truth, but also speculation about people talking about other dimension, whether our universe is the replica of another possibility, blah, blah. These are all notion is like, that's complicated because when you are asleep, you are only present that is in front of you. When you are awakened to something, ironically, you are not actually directly looking at them. You are actually seeing their causes that are not immediately present. So when I look at the rain, oh, just water, gods must be crying or something like that. But for me to understand that, I need to understand its causes. That means looking away from what is immediately present in front of me, but moving to what some people might consider to be madness. Therefore, Plato defines philosophy as a form of madness, because like Thales, they are looking up in the sky and the idiots are falling into the well. This is philosophers. They are not really, therefore, there's always that kind of domain of the political that philosophy has always a complicated relationship to, because politics is the domain of pure appearances. Nobody is real there. Nobody, I mean, especially in the 21st century, everything is fake, not just appearance, but fake, because they are not telling what is, but what should appear to other people. So therefore, Socrates is very critical of what appears in the city, in the democratic space, because we are always hiding something and not revealing the truth. And he also, oh, Isaac, you had something? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with this distinction between Heraclitus's idea of like being like dreaming while you're, or being asleep while you're awake, or dreaming, which kind of seems to me like very almost similar to what you're talking about with looking away. I guess maybe the distinction would be one is ultimately based on still the natural or observations of the natural world, but I don't know, I'm just having difficulty seeing the distinction between the two.
But I mean, you understand we use the being awake and sleeping metaphorically too, right? So all my life, I was going through life as if I was asleep.
But that seems to me like to be similar to what we're talking about with looking away, where you're like creating this your own construction of reality rather than actually being in it.
Good point. I think what Heraclitus means actually, when you are looking at it, you are creating your own construction. When you are directly trying to look at it, so when you are explaining it, you need to look away from it. That's being awake. So that's a possible interpretation. So we always look at being awake as like being immediately present, what is in front of you. But if you use it metaphorically, then, well, we are always awake. I mean, I'm awake, I'm looking at this car. Am I really seeing that car? But when I understand how cars come to be, or how trees are constructed or like came into being, then I truly see them in a way that is not just an appearance, because nature, I love this, like nature loves to hide. I think like loves to hide itself. It is not the way it appears. There is a fundamental fault in our relationship to the world. And that's fascinating, because that's kind of like basic tragic existence of humans on Earth. Like our relationship to the world has to be understood differently than how it looks. That's the idea of being awake. So when you listen to Logos, that's when you are awake. Josue, and then Charlie, and then other people who didn't speak. Blessed, did you raise your hand? Okay, so Josue and then Charlie.
I think there's a part in Heraclitus where he says that I think it's against Hesiod, that he cannot recognize day and night for their one, which I think relates to what Isaac was talking about. I thought it was interesting too, because yeah, like this distinction between day and night, right? They are one. It seems like, yeah, it seems like it's like hiding something from us, like we don't really see it as it is. Just kind of we get carried on with what we see, and I don't know. was just interesting to read.
The road up and the road down are one and the same. The beginning and the end are common on the circumference of a circle. I mean, he makes all these points about the, if you look away from it, you see the unity of opposites. They are actually one. Day and night are one. It doesn't look that way. It hides the fact that they are one. You see the night, you see the day, but you don't see that they are one. Is that what you were implying, Jose? Charlie and then Blessed, yes.
I just thought it was interesting that like just the right way to look at like looking at something and actually seeing it for what it is, and just like even if you look at something, looking at something to be able to fully see it like 100% is beyond the abilities of a person, right? In that we exist in a place of so much uncertainty, so then can you ever even see anything fully?
Well, not understand, like in terms of logos, in terms of account, sure, not fully, like absolutely, but you will see the structure of the thing in front of you. Like it will reveal, like day and night. I mean, you understand, right? Now, day and night are one. I mean,
But it's more like understanding it as a function of like yourself. So like I understand it more the more I exist, because the more I exist, the more logos is revealed to me.
sure, but it also, the physis that you see in front of you hides itself, and then it is revealed in logos. Therefore, you should listen to logos, not to yourself or to even Heraclitus.
Mm.
He says, don't listen to me, listen to logos. And also this comes up in the history of philosophy many times, but one example of this is, I look at this table, I have a perception of that table as being a solid material which has a certain color and a certain shape. But I also know, since we looked away from this table, that it is not a solid object, that it has lots of little things in it called molecules, and they have little subatomic particles that might be constructing its existence. And it is very different than the way it looks. I know this. Science confirms this. Science confirms that there's actually not even colors in the universe, or in my, except in my perception. Now, I believe when I see it, like, yes, I spend a lot of money to get the exact same painting for my walls to make it like yellow or whatever. But at some point, I also know that this color is simply with respect to human eye.
Mm. So logos is just the culmination of so human existence contributes to logos overall.
No, well, it
Well-
it confuses logos. Like, you know, we always say like, the world is such a colorful place. No, it isn't. It is not a colorful place. We introduce colors that also cause trouble for us, of course, because we also introduce skin color, etc. But the world is not like that. Fundamentally, that's a human confusion, because we only look what is in front of us, but we don't look away. So logos is one. And it's like, isn't it wonderful that the world is, no, it isn't. It's horrible. I mean, not horrible, but like, it's not like it's a wonderful thing to be celebrated, because it introduces a lot of distinctions that might not even exist among human beings. Yes, Leslie.
Yeah, like I just found it interesting, like on line 65. Well, like before that, like how when he goes from like eyes being more accurate than witnesses and the ears, and like the whole thing of like sight and like appearance, and then he moves to like how souls have use of the sense of smell in Hades. Like I just didn't quite understand like
I have
what
no
that
idea. Yeah, that's it. You mean on page 48, the top six?
yeah.
Souls have used the sense of smell in Hades, like you smell death. Hades is like really the underworld. So I have no idea what that is. Like, that's bizarre. Like, maybe he smelled death. Or like, I mean, it's probably metaphorical, obviously, but like, souls have used the sense of smell in Hades.
It's like the line before that was like, if all things were smoke, nostrils would distinguish them. So it's just like,
Yeah.
I don't know, I was just thinking, I was like, I don't know, the way I understood it was that the way we interpret the world now is that like we understand it by what we see rather than what we like hear and interpret. So,
Yeah.
and then if things were smoke, then like the nose would then be like the way we, I don't know, it was just like, it was weird, the way we understand and interpret the world. Because things you can't really see.
Well, that's
Something like that, I don't know. But sort of,
that's also related to his conception that the natural process is best to be understood in terms of fire. And you burn, and then that will have that smoke. And because the passage of time is most aptly characterized in terms of fire. Like we are burning, like it could be related to like the energy, I suppose, too, that I don't know what happens with fire. I mean, it sort of continues, right, until it's extinguished. But if you leave it on its own, it will continue. We'll figure out soon once the fire, like we no longer can contain fires on Earth. Okay, who had the, yeah, Kate. Sorry, somebody else had something, but okay, go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, like I guess like in kind of this like discussion on like the theory of forms, why do we assume that the fact that something is changing or remains inconstant or differs between perception makes it any less real? Like why does something have to be stagnant or timeless, I guess, by this definition for it to be considered real or true? Like I guess that's something I get caught up with. Like because you mentioned like the whole like desk thing, and I've heard that used like as like an example before. And I guess like it's kind of like, oh well, the desk is not fully consistent, so it doesn't really truly exist on like a certain level.
Oh, I didn't say it didn't truly exist. It's not the way it looks to me. So that really only concerns my perception. So science tells me that there is a layer of existence within this desk that is not accessible to me. That's all. I mean, I didn't mean to suggest that it's any less real. I obviously don't mean to suggest that colors are any less real, in the sense that, I mean, we kill each other on the basis of that. So it's really real. It has its impact. But I have an accompanying thought that allows the possibility that the world can be very different than how it looks to me.
Gotcha. Okay.
And
Okay.
permanence is the metaphysical sort of criterion for truth. Like if it is, this is sort of our religious Christian, like we assume permanence is more real. That's unfortunately our bias, our historical bias, that we associate something that remains the same. We've privileged that over something that is simply ephemeral. You're right. You're right. And it's questionable too. Why? Yes, Travis.
I'm a little confused. So are you saying that the logos is like it's constant, or it's what it is, but we as humans perceive things different from what logos actually is? Is that what you're
That's
saying?
part of it, yes. That's part of it too, in the sense that we perceive much more difference than it might actually exist, yes. And we might perceive the change, whereas underlying that change, there might be an order. And that's really Heraclitus's insight, that don't listen to me, listen to logos in the sense that there is a stability, maybe there is a permanence, as Kate was suggesting, that is privileged, as opposed to mere change. So when he says about the river, like everything is in flux, you cannot step into the same rivers. It's not possible to step twice into the same river, and all this kind of change that we observe, but that all constant change for Heraclitus has an account or logos behind it. Now, whether that is permanent or not, we are gonna discuss that by juxtaposing this to Parmenides, who, as I said before, seem to be advocating exactly the opposite, the oneness, non-change. So we'll continue with your questions and your picking out passages from Heraclitus, but for Wednesday, please read like very few more pages, up to page 63. So that's about 8 more pages. I mean, if you don't count introduction, it's only really like 5-6 pages. So from 55, the Parmenides of Elea, 55 to 63, the up to further suggestions. So the section 6 for Wednesday, so that on Friday we can discuss both of these philosophers together. So we'll start with Heraclitus on Wednesday, move to Parmenides, and then on Friday we can bring them both together. Only like 8 pages to read between now and Wednesday. And they are so enigmatic anyway. So like you read certain fragments and you go, what is this? Like, what do I do with this? And how we construct a consistent historical philosophical discourse that we distinguish from others on the basis of this is a very interesting phenomenon. I mean, the beginning of philosophy seems to be completely fragmented, which I really like. Okay, it's 11:02. Thank you. We'll talk on, we'll meet on Wednesday on Zoom. Okay.